There's a clay loaf pan in a stone cottage on the edge of Hokkaido that has been used only for the same recipe for 57 years. It rests on a cold shelf where frost patterns claim the window glass each winter dawn. And the first time new dough is pressed against its darkened walls, the loaf will rise as if waking from a long sleep. The family who owns this pan does not speak of it to strangers. They do not weigh the flour or measure the water. They simply knead and shape and set the pan on the wood-fired hearth, and the bread that emerges carries the taste of every generation that made it before. There is a rhythm to this pan's surface, not the smoothness of new clay, but the map of 1,000 small pressures. The heel of a grandmother's palm, the knuckle of a child learning to fold, the faint crescent where a wedding ring rested for 40 years before the metal was passed on. The pan's walls hold these impressions like a diary written in the silent language of fingertips. Archaeologists who study ancient cooking vessels have found that unwashed pottery from the Jomon period still carries lipid residues of wild boar and millet after 10,000 years. The fats seep into the porous clay and polymerize, becoming part of the vessel's very structure. What looks like dirty crust is actually a chemical archive. The pan on this Hokkaido shelf does the same thing, but with butter and sourdough and the quiet grief of a farmer who lost his wife and still baked her recipe every Sunday for 30 years. If the idea that a pan can hold the weight of a farmer's grief settles into you the way butter settles into clay, you understand why this story needs to be tended. Subscribe so you do not miss the next time we pull a relic from a forgotten shelf and let it speak. And in the comments, tell me what one object in your kitchen you would never let soap touch, and why. The pan sat through the decades without complaint. It knew that the family's secret was not in the recipe itself, a simple thing of local wheat, starter, salt, and water, but in the accumulated memory of every time the recipe had been made. Each bake added a layer to the pan's seasoning. Each loaf absorbed a trace of the loaves that came before. The first time a stranger asked for the recipe, the grandmother simply handed them the pan. "Take this," she said. "When you have used it for 50 years, you will know what I know." The stranger did not understand. She scrubbed the pan with hot water and soap, trying to restore it to its original pale clay. She was a sensible woman. She believed that clean meant new, and new meant better. The pan sat in her kitchen for 3 days, stripped of its seasoning. The grandmother felt it from across the village. She walked to the stranger's home, took the pan from the shelf, and pressed her palm against its now pale surface. The clay was cold. The cast of her wedding ring's ghost had vanished beneath the abrasive sponge. Something essential had been erased. "Bring me your bread starter," the grandmother said quietly. "We will rebuild what was lost."
I understand.
A nabemono chef in Kyoto, who has not washed his clay nabe in 40 years, insists that the seasoning holds the soul of every broth ever cooked within it. He is not speaking metaphorically. His family's nabe was gifted to him by his grandmother on her deathbed, and he has never let soap touch its surface. To him, the patina is not grime, It is the accumulated tenderness of every meal shared under his grandmother's roof. When a chef treats his pot as a living archive, he belongs to a lineage that spans centuries, not just his own lifetime. That is the kind of belonging that asks for commitment. Subscribe to stay with this lineage. The next story will meet a vessel that has been simmering miso for 3 generations. And before you go, pause in the comments. What does your kitchen remember that you do not? Sensory chemistry bears this out. As fats polymerize through repeated heating and cooling, they create a non-stick surface that deepens with use. But the Japanese kizushi tradition goes further. It treats seasoned clay as a living thing. The patina is proof of a vessel's history. It is not neglect. It is reverence. The grandmother took the pan back to her cottage. She mixed a fresh batch of dough, pressing it into the clay with the same pressure she had used for decades. She set the pan on the hearth, and she waited. The bread rose slowly as if uncertain. When it emerged, golden and fragrant, the grandmother broke a piece and tasted it. Her eyes closed. She nodded once. The loaves that followed would have to earn their memory again. Layer by layer, bake by bake. The pan would remember what it held, but the remembering would take time. The family understood. They had always understood. In the stone cottage on the edge of Hokkaido, the clay loaf pan sits on its shelf. The frost paints the window glass. The winter dawn finds the pan still and waiting. And when a new hand presses dough into its walls, the bread will rise as if waking from a long sleep. The hand does not have to know the pressure exactly. It only has to be gentle enough to let the pan teach it what it needs to learn. For those who believe bread remembers the hands that kneaded it, this story is yours too. The loaf that whispers your name while baking is not magic. It is patience given form. It is the accumulated warmth of every morning someone trusted the dough enough to let it rise. And if you ever receive a clay pan that has been passed down through hands you never met, do not reach for the soap. Do not scrub away the map of generations pressed into its walls. Instead, press your own palm against the darkened surface. Let the clay feel the warmth of your skin. The pan does not need to be new. It needs to be remembered. The clay loaf pan knows that memory takes generations to build and seconds to lose. So do not wait until the next frost paints your window glass. Subscribe now, so the quiet stories of vessels that hold the world's forgotten tenderness do not pass you by. And in the comments, leave the name of one ancestor whose hands you wish you could press your own against, just once, and tell me what you think they would have cooked. And when the bread rises, golden and fragrant on a cold Hokkaido morning, you will taste not just wheat and salt and thyme, but the quiet presence of every hand that came before yours, still kneading, still waiting, still teaching the dough to rise.